Hello everyone, warm welcome to this event co-organized by the European Youth Forum and European Economic and Social Committee. It's a pleasure to be here. We have amazing speakers at our panel, but also some keynote speakers, and thank you to the European Commission for enabling this event. We are coming from I'm coming from the European Youth Forum, and for the ones who are not that familiar, we are the largest youth organization in Europe. We're gathering more than 100 youth organizations all across the continent of Europe, where we gather young people to discuss, to be active, and to be the ones presenting things to the decision makers. So we're very vocal, very active, and we represent overall from 15 to 30 million young people across Europe through our membership that is very active, both European-wide, international-wide, but also locally and nationally. It's my very, very big pleasure to first welcome Neza Repanšek, a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, who focuses on meaningful youth participation, empowering youth organizations, and works also on global education. And she has broad experience as a youth leader, youth activist, and it is, again, my pleasure to welcome Neza on stage.
Thank you, Anja. Thank you to all who have taken this really good decision to join us today in this meeting. So my name is Neza Repanšek. I come from the EESC, European Economic and Social Committee. We are one of the bodies that is consultative to European Union. So the things said today in the meeting not necessarily reflect the opinions. And I say it as a disclaimer, because I'm a youth trainer also, an educator, and sometimes I like to provoke people to be able to get into the reflective state or the state in mind of this event. And today's event tackles a really serious topic because despite the studies that have been showing that material goods ownership above a certain threshold do not lead to more happiness, well-being, or health, the economic systems still follow a pattern to promote endless consumption of non-essential goods. I don't know if you know, but if everyone around the world would be consuming as much as Europeans do, we would need 3 Earths of natural resources to maintain this current way of life. So 3 times what we have available. And since we do live in a world that is where everything is seen as disposable, replaceable, or temporary, it's not only our landfills that are an obvious sign. We can look at the broken relationships, we can look at the forgotten people, abandoned beliefs, and actually we, in a way, have adopted a throwaway mentality. So doesn't it work? Okay, let's throw it away. And at the same time, the economic system, as I told you before, is not able to provide 3 Earths to everybody. So the inequality is really visible. And then, nevertheless, this fact, we quest for a higher, bigger, better, faster, flashier, and fancier things. I wanted to share a story from the times when I was a cashier worker as a student. An old lady approached me at a counter, and I was trying to be, eco-conscious, consulting with her, and I gave her a plastic bag when this was still one of the things we did in the store. And I said, well, to the lady nicely, like, next time maybe try to bring a reusable bag. And the lady humbly said, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't have this green mentality in the old days, no? We reused bottles of milk, we did, we did sterilized stuff, we sew what was broken, but with the bags, this plastic bag, maybe I'll remember to bring this one next time. But it's this mentality, we didn't have it. And it caused a short reflection in my head, because it was really this part when the community, like if we don't learn nothing from our elders, if I say it in that way, it's really difficult to look to the future in a proper way. I like to quote Pope Francis, because I like him a lot. And he was in one of the Laudato Si encyclicals talking about the communities that don't care about its youth or its elder people have no future. And I think the intergenerational element is really important. And what I really like with EESC, because I try to mention it sometimes, that I am one of the younger members and that our average age probably goes around or above 50 years old, is that I like that the committee is committed to involving young people structurally, that we have a young delegate here also at COP, and that we try to gather opinions and ideas directly from the source. So sourcing out of the good ideas for grassroots. We work with civil society organizations, so I didn't mention it at the beginning, but our committee, we are united, so we are representatives of trade union organization, of employers organizations, and civil society organizations. Me, I come from the Youth Council, but then there are also representatives of farmers, environmentalists, people who work with people with disabilities. So a plethora of organizations formerly united in a civil society body. So as an opportunity that we have, we can express concern, we can be consulted, we give also out opinions to the Commission, to the Parliament. Some of them are on demand, some of them are our own initiative opinions. And I see that we have an option, an open window to review these potential changes. So even though the behavioral changes could be changed to the old ways, they should be structured, and I think that structural policies could be the things that we will see today in the panel, that we will maybe get inspired by the stories, by the practice, and I really look forward to the event. So, thank you.
Thank you, Neza. Our current economic system that is based on extraction, production, and it also consumes waste more than ever, much faster than Earth's resources, as Neza mentioned. And we, as we have been saying, not just at this COP, but also throughout the years, we have to act now. We are at a situation where we are heading to 2.8 degrees, and our inability to fight the climate crisis by addressing symptoms of the crisis is problematic. It is my great pleasure to welcome Sandrine Dixon. She is an international and European climate and energy and sustainable development, sustainable finance, complex system thought leader, and it is a great pleasure to have you here. She's currently the co-president of the Club of Roma and divides her time between lecturing, facilitating different conversations, and advises. She currently chairs the European Commission's expert group on economic and societal impact of research and innovation, and sits on several boards and advisory boards. Please warm welcome to Ms. Sandrine Dixon.
Thank you so much for this warm welcome, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I want to be very clear that the role of the Economic and Social Committee for the European Union is so important. And the reason for that is that what we have already seen as the Club of Rome, those that published actually the limits to growth, 50 years ago, we clearly indicated to the world through our publication that there would be overshoot, that we could not continue to have an extractive economy, and that we could not continue to have population growth at the same time. Now, we are in overshoot, and in some ways we're in global collapse. We have seen a multi-crisis of climate change, COVID, and conflict, especially those of us who are in Europe now even have conflict on our back door. Global collapse has been caused by the shortage of resources, land, and pollution absorption capacity. And eventually this is leading to rising costs and a decline in physical consumption, and in extreme cases, to even population decline we will see in some areas, and also new mobility and migration. 2, can you believe this? We have experienced this overshoot. We are in the midst of the overshoot now. The situation is so obvious because humanity is emitting every year twice as much CO2 as is being absorbed in oceans and forests, and the remaining half is accumulating in the atmosphere. And this is increasing the concentration of CO2 and our temperature. And right now, outside this door, we're debating whether we should still have a target of 1.5, which we must continue to stick to. So what am I trying to say? This is not just about gloom and doom. We need to look forward to the next 50 years and make sure that we don't lose time. This is the decade of action. The question is, what do we do now in order to ensure that we do not have further social tipping points and environmental tipping points accumulating at the same time? This is the message of our new book, Earth for All, A Survival Guide for Humanity, where we have taken system dynamic modeling that is the ethos of the Club of Rome, brought economists from across the globe and scientists, and have come with 2 key scenarios, the too little too late scenario and the giant leap scenario. If we go forward with the too little too late scenario, the scenario that we're seeing right now playing out in those rooms, the scenario that we see every day, those of us living in our own communities, we will never meet 1.5. We will probably get to 2.8 degrees if we're lucky. But if we put in the giant leap, we then need to implement 5 key turnarounds, ensuring that we stop poverty, inequality, that we empower women and diversity across all of our decision-making, ensure that it is integrated into our economy and the way in which we build our financial system. All 3 of those turnarounds working with the essence, the foundation of our dear needs, we as human beings on this planet, energy and food, will enable us to actually meet the giant leap. How much is it going to cost us? 2.3% GDP per annum. It will not cost us the earth, but if we do nothing, it will cost us the earth. Because right now, we are no longer living in a well-being state. In fact, we have never achieved well-being for the majority of the population. Earth for All talks about an Earth for all. It talks about the way in which we can ensure that all continents, all people, are moving in sync to eliminate poverty, inequality, and to empower all people. Let me move to what this looks like in concrete terms. First, support wealth redistribution. Rapidly scale movements to redistribute wealth more to fairly across all jurisdictions and to reduce social tensions so that citizens can truly be a part of the economy. That means 10% of the population of the wealthiest can take no more than 40% of national incomes. Reform the international financial system. Go beyond Bretton Woods, but ensure that our financial system is servicing people, planet, and prosperity at the same time. For the moment, we have over-financialized our economy. There is a total disconnect between an economy that is actually servicing people and the economy that exists today, where shareholders can get profits while they fire 10,000 people at the same time. This is not an economy that functions for people, nor a financial system that takes into consideration their needs. This 2-year research collaboration, Earth for All, A Survival Guide for Humanity, is indicating very clearly the types of policies that we need: debt cancellation, special drawing rights, ensuring that we actually develop universal basic dividend and a citizen fund, bringing together citizens and communities in the way in which they engage in our energy and our food systems, ensuring that we regenerate our food and our agricultural systems, that we don't continue to deplete the land, but that we also triple, if not quadruple, our investments in renewable energy while we address demand-side management. We have an obsession with an extractive economy. We currently have an obsession with supply-side economics. And yet we know that an extractive economy is depleting our resources and creating the very negative feedback loops between biodiversity loss and greenhouse gas emissions. A well-being economy is an economy that fosters the needs of people, planet, and prosperity at the same time. It means that we go beyond GDP and put in place environmental indicators, social indicators, and economic indicators with equal standing. In these hallways, and I have now been here for 10 days, I have spoken in so many forums, I think probably 20 over the last 10 days. And I have only heard once the mention of the links between climate, COVID, and conflict. How is it possible that we have not understood that the COVID effect is a climate effect, that the climate effect is having an impact on pandemics, and that the conflicts that we see today are due to our lack of humanity and our lack of desire to move towards peace? These are interrelated effects, and yet we continue to talk in these hallways about doubting 1.5, about not putting in place loss and damage funds, about not actually shifting the 100 billion, and yet we know that it is the social tipping points that will hit us before the environmental tipping points. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have said in many other fora, we must hold our leaders accountable and ourselves. We cannot be complicit with this folly. I come to you from Europe, where I see the Ukrainian invasion and the impact that it is having on people's lives all the way in Africa. We knew that a virus starting in China could actually affect every single one of us. We are connected. A well-being economy is the way forward. It enables us to eradicate poverty, ensure that actually we get rid of inequality, and that we empower all people to actually thrive and not just survive. So my call to you today is this. As you leave this circus, and it has become a circus, please do not forget your sense of responsibility as one of the connectors of change. We are all change agents here today, and we must be change agents as we leave this hallway. That means that we cannot accept that decisions will not be taken outside of this room in the negotiations, because it does have an impact on all of us, and in particular on the world's most vulnerable. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working together to be the voices of change.
Thank you so much for this. At the beginning of your input, I was scared of what the reality we're living for. And towards the end of it, I figured out that we still have time if we act together and really are the agents of change. And we do hold not just the political decision makers, but also ourselves accountable, and we really act. And you mentioned change agents, and I believe that young people, youth organizations, especially when it comes to the topic of climate crisis, not only climate change, we're the ones that were really at the forefront and were really guiding this, let's say, fight to be the change agents and to really make a contribution in the world and not only prosper but survive. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Njuguna, a Nairobi-based youth climate activist. They are the campaign director at the Kenya Environmental Action Network and part of the Fridays for Future MAPA network, and also very great young, person that inspires everyone. It will be my pleasure to welcome Eric here.
Hi, my name is Eric Njuguna. I'm a youth climate justice organizer from Nairobi, Kenya. I am really happy to be here. The climate crisis is already destroying lives, people's lives, and those who had the least role in causing this crisis are bearing the brunt of it. Let's be clear, this is no coincidence. This reality is a product of systems like colonialism and capitalism, which have not only brought us to this crisis, but are also keeping us in this crisis. It is about time we realize that the very system that brought us into the climate crisis is not the same one that is going to bring us out of it. Right now, there is an ongoing drought in Kenya that is putting millions at severe risk of hunger. Livestock are dying in communities that are dependent on livestock for their own livelihoods. These communities are bearing the brunt of this crisis, yet had the least role in causing it, and are also under-supported when it comes to finance, finance for humanitarian response. Another challenge with the ongoing drought is that people are lacking access to food. In a country like Kenya and in a continent like Africa, where our food systems are destabilized. Kenya and the larger continent basically are net importers of food. Years of policy pushes by neoliberal organizations like the International Monetary Fund, who have pushed structural adjustment programs, have destabilized our food systems. And a lot of the food produced on the African continent is now for export to support European economic growth. African countries have been destabilized. Policy pushes, neoliberal policy pushes like the IMF have stolen our rights to grow our own food on the African continent. For us to achieve climate justice, we need to realize that climate justice is food justice, and we need to support food sovereignty for local communities. We need to realize that for us to have climate justice, we need to support autonomy of African countries. The scenario with the food systems on the African continent is very close to what happens with oil and gas infrastructure on the African continent, and pretty much the entire African economy and global South economies, if you think about it, because most of our economies are oriented around European economic growth. That is why you find that oil and gas infrastructure on the African continent, lots of it is not actually even used on the African continent. Most of it is for export. And that is the reality with even the construction of the East African crude oil pipeline, which is starting from Uganda and ending in Tanzania. Most of it, while it's mined on the African continent, is connected to pipelines and used in European countries. And the profit is not also for African countries. 70% of the profit from the East African crude oil pipeline is going to Total, a French-based oil giant, and CNOOC, the China National Offshore Oil Company. This is the reality, that African oil and gas infrastructure is not even meeting energy demands for millions of Africans who do not have energy access to support a basic life of dignity. We need to realize that the global South is being, our resources in the global South are being stolen. And we need to support African autonomy of our own resources. Let's face it, this is the reality, that European countries are absolutely nothing without exploitation of resources and labor from global South countries. European countries are nowhere without exploitation of labor and resources from global south countries. And this is a system that has been in making for years by institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and years of colonialism and neo-colonialism, because colonialism did not stop. It just took a new form. Now, as Africa is suffering as a result of the climate crisis, there are also narratives blaming African countries because of overpopulation, when that is not the reality. In reality, the carbon footprint of European countries is larger than that of global south countries, and more so that of billionaires who have a larger carbon footprint, but European environmentalists are blaming it on overpopulation or population growth from global south countries. And that is why we need to realize that we cannot point it to overpopulation. And blaming overpopulation as a cause of the climate crisis is a racist myth. We need to find solutions to the climate crisis, but solutions to the climate crisis will not come out of conferences like Conference of Parties. If anything, this is the 27th COP, the 27th failed opportunity to tackle the climate crisis. And from the looks of it, it is also going to end up as a failed opportunity to tackle the climate crisis, because there hasn't been enough action to scale, to match the crisis that is already ongoing. The goal is to limit a global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. But in my opinion, I do think that 1.5 degrees is actually a political compromise, because the impacts of the climate crisis that are being faced right now are at just 1.2 degrees of warming. So you can imagine what the goal 1.5 degrees will have. And what COP has shown us is that while leaders are actually trying to water down 1.5 degrees and instead use well below 2 degrees as the terminology for the final outcomes of COP, there is a huge disconnect between the reality of the climate crisis on the grassroots versus what is happening at spaces like COP. And that is why we need to realize that change will not happen within 2 weeks of a conference. And for us to achieve climate justice, we need a systemic transformation, and a systemic transformation will not happen within 2 weeks of a conference. And I feel like the impact COP has had is that it has had a reductive impact on our ideas of change, because we think that change will happen within a meeting of world leaders, corporates like 600 delegates from the fossil fuel industry, and in a conference supported by Coca-Cola, the largest polluter in the world. These spaces are not meant for us, and it is clear because the outcomes are being watered down and are not up to scale, meeting the reality of what is needed. COP27, which has been branded as the African COP, is just a location change and has not brought what climate justice would have meant for African countries. Instead, these spaces have brought disaster, because climate justice, not all climate action is climate justice work. And in fact, not all climate justice work is climate action, but not necessarily all climate action is climate justice work. And in fact, some climate action is actually creating harm on local communities. And that is why you find that spaces like COP push for climate finance, but this climate finance is debt creating. And global south countries are being pushed to pay for a crisis they had no role in causing, paying back to global north countries. And that is why we need to realize that climate justice is debt justice. At spaces like COP, African leaders are becoming fossil fuel lobby mouthpieces and advocating for fossil fuel infrastructure for the African continent at a time when fossil fuel infrastructure has failed to meet energy demands for African countries and have instead been used for European oil and gas infrastructure, European oil economic growth. It is time that we need a change and move to a just transition. But we cannot move to a just transition if we do not put capitalism in our analysis, because a just transition without capitalism in our analysis means that our fantasy, green fantasy world is rooted in the blood of DRC people, communities in the DRC who are overexploited and where in these communities where cobalt and lithium are being mined, minerals that are important for a shift to renewable energy, to power renewable energy batteries. We need a systemic change, and a systemic change will start from dismantling metrics like GDP, which are being used to measure economic prosperity. I mean, it is indeed true that mining oil and gas infrastructure could indeed increase GDP, but literally anything could increase GDP. I mean, cut forests and construct real estate on it, that is GDP on it, and even sell the trees for timber, that is GDP growth. Sacrifice our planet, construct new fossil fuel infrastructure for profit, that is GDP growth. And that is why we need to move from away from GDP as a metric to measure economic growth. Secondly, as we move to a just transition, we need to support a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And that starts with stopping all new oil and gas infrastructure and moving to a just transition that prioritizes workers, because climate justice is workers' justice. And even workers from the fossil fuel industry deserve a just transition where they can work in green jobs.
Eric, I'm sorry, I'm gonna, one more minute.
One more minute, okay. And finally, we need to redistribute wealth. And as we redistribute wealth, we need to realize that as we tax the rich, we also need to stop wealth accumulation, because there is no ethical way of wealth accumulation to a point that we have right now with billionaires, because I do believe that billionaires should not be existing. We need, well, if we tax the rich, we need to realize that taxing the rich is a band-aid solution. And beyond implementing band-aid solutions like taxing the rich, we also need to stop that kind of wealth accumulation. I could speak for years, but I'm going to stop it at this. Thank you so much for listening to me, and let's talk later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It has been an honor hearing both of your inputs. And now we're going to proceed with the panel discussion. So I'm going to move closer so that I'm closer to her speakers. We have with us 4 brilliant speakers that are in the beginning stage of their professional careers or already in their professional careers, but they're all here ready to fight for the solution of climate crisis. We have with us Emilia Reyes from Equidad, Program Director of Policies and Budgets for Equality and Sustainable Development and Gender Equality, Citizenship, Work and Family. She is a co-lead of the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition in the UN Women's Beijing Plus 25 process. Welcome, Iman. We also have Hania Imran, youth climate activist from Pakistan. She is a founder of Youth Climate Activists Pakistan, with over 100 plus youth activists from all across Pakistan, where you organize and mobilize and have conversations regarding the climate crisis. Welcome. We also have Helena van Tischler, member of the International Association for Students in Agriculture and Related Sciences. She's a student of bioengineering, and you followed particularly here a lot of sessions on food and agriculture. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Petros Kokkalis, member of the European Parliament, and also Secretary General of Organization Earth and Environmental Education NGO. Welcome. So, to start off, I'm going to ask you to go from one to another, and the question is, what are the key leverage points to move towards a new system that prioritizes well-being of people and the planet? And I would ask you to start.
Thank you so much. I'm really surprised about the quality of the speakers in a positive way in the context of the COP. So I'm really honored to be here joining you all, and I don't want this event ever to end. I look forward to hearing what the rest of the panelists want to say. I just want to say I'm part of the feminist movement, and I'm also a mobilizer, especially for cross-movement mobilization. I'm convinced that not any single social movement alone can achieve meaningful solutions, especially facing the dimensions that we have in front of us. I'm also based in Mexico City, and I very much make alliances with southern movements. But I've came to this point in realizing that without mobilizing the global north, there is really not going to be any change. No matter how hard the global south fight, not only the social movements, but also the leaders, the global north keeps on blocking every meaningful resolution everywhere. If this COP is a circus, it has a name. The responsibles have a name, and that's the global north, and in different negotiation groups, but not only here in the COP, but it also happens in the economic spheres, where the global north leaders have been blocking every decision that is decent and that is really aiming at protecting life and the well-being of people on the planet. So at this moment in time, I'm convinced that there is a real need to work in the global north. The global north organizations have this very racist view that they need to do capacity building for the global south. And yet we are seeing a rise of fundamentalisms in the global north and a rise of fascism and many other political regimes that are balancing all of the decent proposals that are out there. And so it is extremely worrisome because, of course, we have our rate of fascism in the south, but a fascist in the north is going to impact globally the life of people on the planet as opposed to those that are in our territories. And yet also, over and over, for instance, the Latin American region have started to get very progressive leaders fighting precisely fascism on the ground, in the political polls, etc. And we don't see that happening. So now, as opposed of, all of these global north organizations are telling us, oh, you should work with your communities because we have all of these methodologies for you to learn and work with your communities. Well, now we want you to work on your own communities and use your own methodologies with your population and fight bad fascism in the ground with your own methodologies. And maybe you also need capacity building from the global south who have actually made some victories and advance in those fields. And this is really key for us because, as a matter of fact, we are really interested in the new conversations for the first time that are happening in the global north about degrowth. Degrowth has been over and over coming from traditions in the global south like Ubuntu or Buen Vivir, but for the first time we're seeing a radical revolution that is a macro revolution in the discourses in the global north, aiming at degrowthing three things. One, degrowth for the developed countries, because they are extracting 73% of the overshoot and material resources in the world, and most of it, half of it is in the global south, so degrowth in the global north. Second, degrowth for the wealthy in the north and in the south, because we know that just last week we heard that data that the 1% of the billionaires emit 1 million more carbon emissions than the average person. And three, to degrow the sectors that are relevant and are creating life and ecosystems, such as the jets and retailing and obsolete technological obsolescence, etc. We have many examples of that. So the bet for degrowth in these spaces has to come from the push in the global north, and that's where we are counting on people in the global north, these alliances with wonderful youth that are pushing for this radical transformation. And but also I want to say that I've been inviting colleagues from the economic justice movement to join the fight for the environmental justice, because actually you cannot be an environmentalist if you're not opposed capitalism system. If you are still believing in a capitalistic system, then your battle is going to be lost. There is no possible greening of the system, the capitalistic system that is going to achieve. Actually, I'm really surprised about the data that we're going to need 3 planets. My data is that we're going to need 9. But maybe that's the difference, because it's not only about Europe, but also about the rest of the developed countries. So we also need to see a globalized alliance of developed countries, people, citizens, mobilizing towards this agenda, because the EU is just a negotiating bloc. We need also other alliances. And the fight is not going to happen in the UNFCCC. It's going to happen in the global financial and economic architecture, in the informal spaces and illegitimate spaces of powers like the G7, G20, the Club of Paris and others, but also in the legitimate spaces of powers like the UN that are now is suffering a corporate capture. And so even the recommendations of the human rights treaty bodies and the recommendation of UN human rights rapporteurs are not abided by the UN agencies themselves, like in these alliances with Coca-Cola or UN Women with BlackRock. Just want to finalize in saying that 2 weeks ago, the UN Human Rights Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance released a report on climate and racial justice, and she's calling this problem a racial issue. And she's actually saying that climate change is generating sacrifice racial zones, and that have been expanded by the false solutions that have been proposed here, plus by the carbon emissions of developed countries. So this is a really systemic issue, and I'm very pleased to see what is going to come up in this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anja, also question to you. What are the key leverage points to move towards a new system that prioritizes the well-being of people and planet?
Okay, hello everyone. To everybody that's falling asleep, same. But yeah, there's the speakers and everybody that's spoken here so far has brought up some very, very important points and very, I mean, they've basically covered a lot of what I believe needed to be said here. But essentially, I think one of the most important things that I want to bring up is what's happening in Pakistan. As a lot of you all know already, that there's been floods going on in Pakistan, and that have been going on for the last few months, and that there's 33 million people that have been affected, and that there's 2,000 people that have died so far. And they're just numbers until you put it into perspective of how tragic it actually is. And that's 33 million people that are internally displaced, and there's people that are dying now, not because of the floods, but because of diseases and other things that are essentially affecting them and killing them. So when we talk about a well-being economy and then how to get there, I believe first, and then there was somebody that also mentioned that we don't just survive, but we thrive. I think that is a very important point, but the fact right now is, and the situation in my country is that this is not something that's going to happen in the future, and it's not something that's, going to, if it's going to be solved in 10 years, that, it's already the end of the world for many, many people, and many people that I know and that are in my country. So I believe that when we talk about surviving and not thriving, I think first you have to even have the option of surviving. People are not surviving, they're not living, they're not alive. There's people that are essentially currently dying, and that in each time that we delay or say, okay, we're gonna have these conversations at the next COP, every second that we do not come to a decision or do not act, there are people that die. So and suffer in many other ways. It's not just death. So I believe that when it comes to well-being economy, I think we also have to consider the fact that there's people that aren't even at the point where we're surviving. So yeah, and then of course this has already been mentioned, but I believe that a just transition is something that is extremely important, because when we I read this somewhere the other day, which is end fossil fuels or perish, which I truly believe in, because essentially when we talk about, I mean, we have to have radical action. Like, we need to be able to take action that completely changes the systems that we're currently living in, because otherwise there will be millions and soon billions of people, and countries that will be underwater, and countries that will be uninhabitable. And this is going to happen very soon. I mean, it's already happening. So I think, and then and because we talk about radical action and huge changes, and then if hopefully that happens, we need a just transition in the sense that there's many people that are going to be affected with their jobs, et cetera, and that we need to be able to sort of give them green jobs and be able to provide the necessities that they need, and yeah, so that there's not more and more people that suffer while we're trying to actually solve this crisis. So yeah, that's basically pretty much it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Moving on to Helena, same question.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, we learned a lot about how our system is failing, definitely in the global south, but the system is also failing in the global north. I'm from Belgium, and I'm specialized in agriculture and food. And what we see in food is that this system has a triple burden of malnutrition. We have people with overweight who eat too much or unhealthy. Then we have people with undernutrition who just don't eat enough, and micronutrition deficiency, so who lack, for example, vitamin A. This system is not able to contribute to a fair distribution of food. And not only do we see that on the global scale, for example, global north, who has more food in their store than the global south, but we also see it in one country. We also see it in one city. And even sometimes in one family, there can be such a difference between eating patterns and overconsumption, or just not having enough. When we speak, 1 of 9 people will go to bed hungry tonight. 1 of 9 people will not be able to eat enough, while 2.5 people eat too much. That's insane if you see that 1 billion people doesn't have enough food, while others eat too much. Can we not distribute the food more evenly? Can we not revise the system to a more equally distribution? If we see that those 3 malnutritions coexist, we know that there is something wrong with the IPAD system. IPAD stands for impact equals population, affluence, and technology. Here at COP, we speak a lot about our technology is going to save us, so if we reduce our technology impact, we will reduce our global impact. We also speak about our population, like we heard, that if we reduce our population, we will reduce our impact. But if we see that population is already reducing in some countries because we don't have a fair system, that is not a fair solution. What really is a solution is looking at our affluence, how much we actually use. Like already said, degrowth. We must really go back to what we actually need, how much we actually need to sustain our life. What we also see is what is causing overweight is some specific sort of foods, mainly meat, alcohol, sugar, and fatty acids. Those foods aren't even healthy for you, so why do we buy so much unhealthy food that is not only unhealthy for yourself, but also really bad for the environment? Why do we keep giving money and subsidizing meat production while we know what the effect is, and while we know that it's not even helping the world population to be healthier and live in a well-being society? What's also really important is that the people who produce the food often don't eat enough. It's said in Africa, they produce a lot of food that we eat in Europe, but they cannot sustain themselves. Those social tripping points are coming at us really fast. We see climate change affecting agriculture and failing the system with sustaining our food needs. While in stores, we never see the stores be empty in Europe. We always see food. We always see that we have enough, that we can buy more, that we should eat more, that it's in our culture to just buy and buy and buy. But then, if the stores is always full, but food spoil, we also throw away billions and billions of food billions of food that could go to people who actually need it. So we need to rethink how we have food losses and food waste. And then I want to end with what the youth is. We already heard so much inspiring stories of how youth is on the forefront, but youth is often not able to speak up, but we see the injustice, we see the imbalance of food cycle, and we don't understand. We don't understand why there is enough food, but we are not able to contribute to a fair system. We don't get the system like it's working today. Why can someone from your classroom not buy an ice cream while others can buy one every day? Why can someone on the other side of the world has to think about survival, but other peoples are thinking about having more money? I think it's just not right. But I think it's because when you get older, you're used at ignoring all the injustice. You have seen it. You have seen it when you were younger. You have seen the injustice, but you learn to ignore it, because when you're younger, you think you cannot change the world. You think you're too young to change, so you just learn to ignore what's happening. And then it's time to speak up. You're already in the system. You're already not able anymore to think and see the injustice to change it. So I want to ask you to relearn to see the injustice, to listen to what these people have to say, and give the opportunities to youth to really act. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kokkalis, you are sitting at the decision makers table in the European Parliament. So also the same question to you. What are the key leverage points on tackling injustice and moving towards a system that prioritizes well-being of people and planet?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this table as a white, middle-aged, privileged man. It is a privilege and an inspiration to hear and feel the passion of the youth from all over the world in their demand for justice and change. And I won't bring anything new to say that the way to fight overconsumption, there is no such thing as overconsumption, there is overwaste, and it's called greed and gluttony, and it is the product of our financial system. And I will try to bring this into this COP, which I agree is not the place for systemic transformation, but I would disagree that this is another failing opportunity to save the planet, because this is the only opportunity. Even if with its failings, only within these COPs have we managed, after all these years, to at least bring some sort of a road towards a solution. Without the COPs, it's barbarism. We have a saying in the left, which is socialism or barbarism. Barbarism is what will happen at the 3-point degrees world. Barbarism is what is meant by Sandrine Dixon when she rightly says that the social tipping points are going to hit us before the climate tipping points. Because unlike in my generation, where we imagined Armageddon and apocalypse as a momentous event that will happen at the push of a button and a nuclear explosion that will, vaporize us immediately, this will not happen this way. This will be a classic person against person, man eat man, hungry people attacking other hungry people on the basis of their tribe affiliation, on the basis of their access to resources, of even more scarce resources, and it will happen not in moments, it will happen in agonizing decades. So this is something we really don't want to happen. Okay, capitalism is obviously the problem, but let me take 1 minute, which is the amount of time that a parliamentarian of the left has on the parliament to read what I said in the plenary on the resolution before coming to COP. I said, COP are always about emissions, however, this one is really about justice. Gutierrez explained, today it's Pakistan, tomorrow it could be any country. In fact, already today we experience a climate disaster every day on the planet. And this is only going to get worse as global emissions continue to rise. These disasters are of our own making, and they fall on those least responsible and those least able to shelter and recover. Yet, we have so far failed to heed our call for the creation of a new loss and damage finance facility. Tens of countries in the global south are bonded into unsustainable debt to us and are thus unable to tackle those climate disasters, leading to extreme poverty and lethal instability. These, colleagues, cannot be good neither for our economy, neither for our souls. So we call for the European Union to lead the world in pushing for a new global financial architecture beyond the Washington Consensus, mobilizing the trillions needed in new and additional public finance to provide adequate action on mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, from new special drawing rights and debt relief for climate actions to the bridge down agenda and a broader reform of the Bretton Woods institutions, including the World Bank and the IMF. Multiple ideas are being discussed. This is the time to reckon with the white man's burden and pay for the crimes of our colonial past and save the world and ourselves while doing it. So there is this discussion in the global north, and the question is, how does this fit into this COP, and how does it finally come home to roost? There is this discussion that we're trying to escape the loss and damage demand by the global south, which is of our making, and we cannot escape it anymore, as last year in Glasgow we accepted in principle the liability, and now everybody's trying to just sort of buy out time, and let's find a way to measure it and operationalize and all that, and maybe insure it and find a way to monetize it and find a way to bring it into the market, which is very difficult to do with adaptation and loss and damage, unlike mitigation. So we are trying to push the ball forward with the idea that, okay, if the North says that we accept the facility, the last facility we created, the Global Climate Fund, took 6 years to have any money in it, and right now, as we speak, this money is not flowing to you, and you can't use it. And to use the example of Pakistan, in the past 10 years, Pakistan has received 154 million euros from the Global Climate Fund, while the current damage is at 50 billion euros, and the needs of Pakistan, according to the World Bank, until 2044 adaptation is actually $348 billion. So another facility is really not going to cut it. The only thing that's going to cut it is a different wiring of the financial architecture. What does this mean? What is Bretton Woods? So, because maybe I'm older and I'm a boomer, but Bretton Woods was the agreement that happened after World War II, which was a major disaster. A major disaster with over 50 million people dead. And it was the system that created the dollar world. And that's where all the world revolves around. Now, exactly after World War II, because people were really traumatized, some good things happened. For example, the United Nations and the re-establishment of multilateralism. For example, the idea of social equality being very important and less inequality. And we moved into what is called the social welfare state, which actually reduced inequalities in the West. Now these inequalities are in the level where they were in World War I. They're like opened up like this, and I will explain why. Also, what happened was the elimination of political colonization, even though economic exploitation continues to this day. Now, in 1972, Sandrine, the Club of Rome, recognized the limits of growth, and that's where we have the great acceleration of pollution, the great acceleration of production, because what also happened after World War II is that we discovered planned obsolescence, the idea that we make products to break so we can consume more, the idea of constant consumerism, and at some point in the 70s, it became obvious that this cannot go much longer. In 1973, we had the oil crisis, the first oil crisis, which made the system collapse, and we arrived at the moment where Ronald Reagan decides to remove the solar panels from the White House where Jimmy Carter had put them, and thus taking us back 25 years in terms of renewable energies. Also, they established what is called the neoliberal world order, the neoliberal economics, the idea that politics can't do anything and markets should be left alone to rule the world. And that has resulted in a cannibal capitalism, which has completely eaten away. It eats away, devours our natural resources, and it devours our social resources, and basically hitting hard the twin limits of humans on Earth, the social cohesion, the limit of social cohesion, and the limit of the planetary boundaries. So this is our enemy. So how do we go about and what do we need from a new Bretton Woods agreement? We need, for example, for sure, and right now and for a first step, the debt cancellation, or at least a system where we have long-term bonds where the countries of the global south are not paying, neither interested, no interest on the loans, and they're not getting any loans, they're getting grants. And we need to start, and I will stop here because this can go on as a long conversation. I will stop here by bringing it to the European Union. In the European Union, the instrument of neoliberalism is called the Stability and Growth Pact. It's the one, we don't have a constitution, but we have an agreement between ourselves in terms of our economies and how much debt there can be. We are constrained in public spending. That is public spending, meaning public health, meaning public education, and so on. So now we are starting to have in Europe loss and damage. We have places in Europe where we have damage and loss by citizens who have done nothing wrong, have omitted nothing, but are the victims of decades of government inaction. Now the government needs to spend public money to restitute these areas. In our case, in my country, it was an enormous wildfire, which burned for 3 weeks and destroyed a huge place. So is the government going to be penalized for investing or repairing this area? This is absolutely not the idea. So now, ahead of us, as far as European policy makers are focused, is the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact to make a pact that is an actual pact for sustainable development and guarantees not only the economic aspect, but also the fiscal sustainability, but also the European climate law, which is a legal obligation in Europe that we need to become the climate neutral by 2050, which means we have to be at least 55% less by 2030, which is in 7 years, which means we need to decarbonize now. And also the European social pillar, the European pillar of social rights, which is a very nice agreement, which has no legal backing, which has to do with things like minimum wage, has to do with things with public health provision, with solidarity and all that. So this is a big struggle going forward, but contrary to what we always feel at the COP, I have to share with you the feeling that this COP is taking us around the curve, or it may take us around the curve or over a cusp if, like Kevin said, we take the struggle out of here and bring it, like Sandrine said, to the streets, to everybody, as these agents of change, to bring this system down. Thank you.
Thank you. We went through the first round of questions. So also if other panelists and also the two speakers from before have any questions or inputs, just signal to me and I'll give you the word. Okay, first signal is here. Giving the word to Emilia.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciate what has been said in the panel already. I just have a disagreement with the loss and damage facility, because indeed we need a reform of the international economic and financial agenda. Actually, we need to reform trade. We need tax justice. There is, well, just to give you a context, of course, the global north has a historical debt because it has caused all of this damage, so they need to pay. So loss and damage facility is a reparation and especially a retribution agenda that we need to get. And so by saying that the developed countries have not paid the 100 billion for the GCF, well, that's telling us that the global north has no word, as they kept on doing, of course, in the official development assistance commitment of the 7% of the commitments on towards development funds. funding. But we cannot do that. We cannot keep on negotiating with power, and when the power commits, say, I have no word, you cannot trust me. They need to pay, and they need to fulfill their words. So this is a matter again, of decency and of redistribution. And just to say that for tax justice, the developing country subsidizes the global north. Just in the past 5 years, the global north emitted $8 trillion in tax abuse by corporations from the global south to the global north. So there is money. And again, the developed countries have been blocking a global tax facility or convention in the UN where we can really deal with all decisions and sum it up with the debt cancellation, but also regulating the financial sector, because that is the one that is pulling those trillions into the fossil fuels industry. So those are the measures. So I also disagree on inviting people to take the streets. I think that there is this reformist path that we can take, and of course we need to mobilize and add pressure. But again, there are very valuable debates that are happening here at the COP and in those spaces. So I just invite us all, especially with this type of constructive parliamentarians and people that are representative, to build more alliances. And I think that there is a lot of hope, despite the disaster profiteering that we're seeing with the false solutions, again, giving the private sector more floor rather than giving space for the public funding. But then just look forward to engaging. But other than that, very happy to hear from a German parliamentarian about debt cancellation and all of these progressive ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. We are often talking to the convinced people in a way. So we're talking among a group that already agrees. And we have one decision maker here, but the rest are in other rooms behind closed doors. So let me start with Mr. Kokkalis. What do we as NGOs or as youth have to do to be louder on that side as well, to really make an impact, to really implement the things that we all know are needed to be implemented yesterday?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm not German. Thank you for calling me progressive, but I'm Greek. And also let me say that I did not actually call for a revolution. What I called is really the answer to your question, which is people being very actively participating and vividly participating and visibly participating and being on the streets in this sort of peaceful, democratic participation that is being evidenced by youth all over the world. I am part of a mandate that was elected as part of the Green Wave, which was a result of thousands of young people marching on the streets, mostly Northern European streets, which got this parliament elected, which voted the Green Deal, and we're trying to push forward all that. So to me, there is no greater currency in my short experience in politics. There is nothing more valuable than young people being loud. So now, it is also very important that these young people are sticking to the science, which is irrefutable. And we are fighting here the rare political battle with an adversary which has no willingness, no ability, no capability to negotiate with us. The climate is a physical entity. It does not care about our compromises, about our political expediencies, about our capabilities. It just takes care, it's just molecules. So the NGOs are extremely important for us in the progressive part of the parliament because they provide us with science-based arguments and evidence to put against the other side of the parliament, which gets its science and its arguments from the corporate sides, from the corporate lobbies. So NGOs are really our lobbies for the good. And they're very, very valuable for us, and they are as valuable as are the youth being active, vocal, democratic, and peaceful. And I'm not sure how long this is going to last for, because we had a discussion earlier about where all this is going and how barbarism is going to look on Earth. So I hope it stays democratic.
Okay, thank you. Helena and Anja, you are both youth leaders, youth activists, trying to be vocal, and you do come from different perspectives, different continents as well. How do you see the role of youth, and since you are the loud ones, as it said, that there's nothing more valuable than loud people. You are loud. How is it for you being the loud voice? Do you feel like that your actions, your fights are implemented, or do you need more support in this regard?
Okay, so I think that I've been an activist for the last 5 years, and this past year I felt more hopeless than I have ever felt in my entire life. It is because, of course, what's happening in my country, and I really had to ask myself some hard questions as to whether activism was doing, or my activism specifically, was doing anything at all to be able to solve or even adapt to this crisis. And of course, and I've had some very difficult conversations with people that have experienced the floods as well, and of course, people that are facing the effects of the climate crisis. And I think that, at some point and there's a lot of journalists and media that ask, what have you achieved? And they want like the concrete results, and it is difficult to answer that question. And I have never been able to answer that question because, what have we achieved? And so, yeah, it's a sad question, but yeah, so I think that, of course, we have no choice when it is your life on the line. If either it is life or death for you, you have no choice but to fight. I mean, if you give up, it's just, then there's nothing. So even if you do feel hopeless, and a lot of us in Pakistan, and activists specifically, are feeling hopeless, but we have no choice but to keep fighting, but to keep speaking, to keep doing our activism, to keep organizing protests, to keep putting pressure on governments and corporations that are responsible for this crisis. And yeah, I think that is so as to whether or not we've actually, whether or not we feel that our voices are being heard, or that what we're saying is being implemented. I think that to an extent, a very little extent, that they are being heard, but it's been a very slow change. So it's taken years and years and years for me to even be present here, because I did not think that I would ever get to attend a COP conference, because of course there's so many hurdles that come in the way as well. So yeah, so I think that as youth, especially in Pakistan, it is extremely difficult. But at the same time, because there's a lot of, I believe, Europeans here, that the people in Europe that are protesting, I know that there have been some controversial protests where people have been, specifically the one where there was a painting and somebody threw soup on it, that, there's a lot of controversy regarding that. But I think protests like that, or any kind of protest, honestly, to acknowledge the climate crisis and put pressure on your governments that are causing this crisis, is like a warm hug to the people that are facing this crisis on the other end of the world. And of course, people are facing this crisis everywhere, but of course, there's more people that are, yeah. So I think that if you are protesting, or if you are organizing, or if you are part of the negotiations, or you are doing what you can where you are, I think that that is what essentially gives us hope from all across the world. And to keep doing that, and yeah, pretty much, I think, yeah, a very confusing answer, but yeah.
Thank you, Helena.
Yeah. Thank you for your hopeful words. I have been an activist on a sort of other way, I would say. I'm also the policymaker on sustainability in my university council, and there I have been this year very, very disappointed. We, my university, we have the experts, we have the scientists, we have the people who know every detail. We made transitions plans, we worked on it, and then at the final way to have to implement it, just the board said, no, we don't trust this. It's too, it's too extreme, we don't trust it. And I was like, how can we, as youth, explain that these are your own scientists? These were scientists of our university that we didn't trust it. If that happens in a university where the knowledge is, how does it happen at governments? I was really, I'm still frustrated about how this can happen. And we're with the youth, we're now trying to put pressure on the board of my university to actually implement this traditions plan, which in my opinion are not transformative at all. They're really just low-hanging fruit, and even that gets not put on the table. So yeah, I think we have to be hopeful. I agree that there is lows and highs in being an activist. You see a lot of beautiful people fighting for a climate crisis, but in the boards, we are not heard enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, you asked for a comment.
Okay. Young people are joining the climate movement at a pivotal time. This year, I attended the Stockholm Plus 50, which is the anniversary, basically, of the first ever UN conference on the human environment, which happened in 1972. Having attended that conference, I must say, I feel very scared, because that is the 50th anniversary of the first time ever world leaders convened to talk about the environment. And I can imagine that there have been 50 years to tackle what we have to do now in 10 years. Because to limit a global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, the window for action is closing, and at current emission rates, we can deplete that within around 7 years. So having attended Stockholm Plus 50, I'm thinking that we have only 7 years to achieve what 50 years of conferences haven't. So young people are joining the climate movement at a very serious time where we need action within 7 years, literally, or else we're limiting, we are past the 1.5 degrees goal. And to be honest, even 1.2 is already hell. And that is why I necessarily do not agree that COP is the only space, as in, because this system has directed us to only conferences as the only point for solutions when 50 years of conferences haven't brought us. Do we need to wait for another 50 years? Albert Einstein once said that insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results, right? So that is repeating the same thing over and over again, and we're expecting the same results. And it's about, we think about system change and what does it mean for us? Does it mean conferences, or does it mean building people assemblies and demanding change from that? What does it mean exactly for us? These are the questions. I do not have the answers, but what I do know is that those are the right questions.
Thank you. Now we give the floor to the audience. If you have any questions to our speakers, we have space for 1 to maximum 2 questions. So if you have any, I kindly ask to raise your hands. Yes, there's one question here. And please say to which speaker it is directed to. And note that we have about 6 minutes left until the closing part. So I ask you to have brief answers.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rawan, and I'm from Sudan. I am currently working in a Sudanese NGO that's called the Sudanese Environment Conservation Society. And what I want to reflect is Sudan is adversely and negatively affected by climate change. We're suffering from floods, diseases, pandemics, internally displaced people, and etc. I am currently a member of a number of youth NGOs that are trying to tackle the climate change issue and environment in general. I am also a project coordinator of a German project that aims to build the capacity of youth NGOs in both Sudan and Egypt. My question is simple, that Sudan has very limited and poor resources. We are, just like you said earlier, we're feeling very helpless. We're trying to do a lot of change, but it's really difficult. So given your expertise in the field, I want to say, what I want to ask, what exactly can we do, given our resources and our conditions in Sudan? What exactly can we do to help implement the climate change, to unify all of our efforts together as youth from all over the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a particular speaker you're addressing? No, does someone feel comfortable to answer this question first? Okay, yeah, we can also take the second question and then do a combination. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's not a question. It's just
Okay.
an observation. And I'm a German trade unionist my whole life. My grandpa was a trade unionist. My father was a great trade unionist. And 150 years ago, people started fighting for human rights and for social justice. So just a message, never give up. The only language was politicians are understanding is that we go to the street and we fight for our rights, and we shouldn't give up and shouldn't be frustrated for that. Just a comment for this.
Thank you. So yeah, we can now proceed with answering the question.
Okay, so your question was very difficult because I think that's something that we're all trying to figure out. I think to unify the youth movement, of course, there's many things that we can do that we are not doing, or things that we are currently doing that we need to change. But essentially, I think one of the benefits of COP is that there's a lot of youth here, and that we can connect with them, and that we get to meet them at least once a year, and we're able to sort of organize together. So I honestly don't have a great answer for you, because I think that's something that we're all trying to figure out. But essentially in Pakistan, what we've done is it's taken a few years, but in my city, Islamabad, we've had all the different youth organizations, and we've sort of made a group with all of them, like the main people that are working in the groups. And what we do is now that instead of having different events with maybe one organization is organizing a specific protest, what we do is that we do everything together. So it's maybe there's Fridays for Future, and then there's the organization that I run, and then there's like 4 other different organizations, and some people are working in civil society, and some people are working in some of the embassies, and some people are, so we have all of those people, and we get them together. We have study circles, we have protests, we have different sort of events, so that we can sort of build that community, because specifically in Pakistan, it was, in my city specifically, it was not existing before. So I think in that way we are sort of trying to unify and to be able to show a united front. So even if we have our own sort of internal problems, what we do is every activist that's here from Pakistan, we convened and we discussed what we want to demand from world leaders at COP. And so everybody that was sort of going to COP stayed silent in the meeting, and everybody else was speaking, and then we just took notes and decided, okay, these are the 4 points or the 5 points that we want to focus on while we're at COP. So I think there's different ways that you can go about it. I think the youth has been already very creative, and that we must continue to be creative, because obviously we don't have a lot of resources. I mean, that's a problem as well, that we don't have the resources to be able to organize. I mean, even in Islamabad, we don't even have the spaces to be able to meet each other. So there's a lot of difficulties, but I think that as he said, that we should not give up, and that we must keep going, because obviously we have no other choice but to keep trying and keep fighting. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. If there's no other comments, I would like now to give the floor to Sophia Wiegand. She is the youth delegate for COP27 from EESC, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm glad the microphone works. Thank you very much to all the speakers and panelists for your really very impressive and interesting contributions. I think it's become very clear how urgent it is that we transform the current economic system that we live in, and how overconsumption is really at the center of all the problems that we're currently having. if we weren't living in a system that is so focused on extracting, producing more, consuming more resources, and in the worst case, just wasting them, then we wouldn't have the climate crisis as we have it today, and we also wouldn't have the same social inequalities that we have today. And as Sandrine has made it very clear, we have known we will overshoot for decades. And instead of actually slowing down, we have accelerated the overconsumption. I think the Earth Overshoot Day is a very good example for this. If you're not familiar with the concept, the Earth Overshoot Day is the day every year where we as a global community have exceeded the amount of resources the Earth can reproduce in that year. And it's moving up every single year for the last years and decades. This year it was already on 28th of July. For some countries or communities like the EU, it's even sooner. It's like after a third of the year. And this is frankly unacceptable. We must really address this. And I think as civil society, we have reasons to be very concerned. When we look at this COP, there's 25% more fossil fuel company representatives than last year in Glasgow. Sometimes they're part of official delegations. And they keep telling the representatives and us, we can keep up the current levels of consumption. We can somehow decarbonize the fossil fuels through CCS and other greenwashing technologies. But actually, we really, really need to address the overconsumption. And when we hear reports that even the 1.5 degree target is in question, we must really be alarmed and say, not with us, this is not happening. We've also heard that the overconsumption problem is also a redistribution problem. We can't have overconsumption in some parts of the world when other communities are still lacking the basic resources. This is not in line with any definition of well-being, obviously, and I really want to echo Eric's demand, tax the rich. The richest 1% of this world are emitting more than double of what the poorest 50% are emitting. We have this international legal principle, the polluter pays. Those are polluters, make them pay. They are responsible. So this is something that's absolutely essential. And we as Europeans, we as the so-called developed countries, we also have to face our own responsibility. In Europe, we are still having a resource impact of more than double or even 3 times, according to some statistics, of what would be sustainable. And yet the European Union as such is lacking absolute resource consumption targets. Some countries are giving some positive impulses. I believe Finland and the Netherlands have already implemented such targets in their national strategies, but that's just not enough. We as EU need to step up. We also need to face our historical responsibility, because Eric is absolutely right. This whole over-consumption problem would not exist if it wasn't built on a colonial history of extracting resources from exactly the countries and regions where they are now lacking the most. These are often communities that have for a long time lived in harmony with their land, in stewardship, and they are now lacking what they need the most. And we need to work together to bring back autonomy and decision-making to those communities. We also need to face the fact that this colonialism has continued even in some conservation and climate policy issues, where when we look at national parks, they've first been established as governments saying, oh, these are very pristine areas, we need to protect them, and the indigenous people living there, they are cutting down the forests, they are destroying the land. We need to move them out, and we need to establish this conservation area to make sure that this is not destroyed. But they often completely ignore the fact that these areas are such pristine because the indigenous communities have so long taken care of them in line with their traditional knowledge. So we need to really learn from each other. And last but not least, since today is Biodiversity Day, I think it's really become clear we need to advocate for a new environmental paradigm that recognizes biodiversity not as something that's nice to have and that will protect the koalas and all these nice animals that we find cute, but actually if biodiversity dies, we die. It's an absolutely crucial issue, and we need to stop seeing nature as something that can be valued in economic terms because it's invaluable to us. So thank you again to all the panelists for your great input. Thank you all for attending this event, for asking questions, for sticking around till the end. And let's keep working together as civil societies, as activists, to give each other hope, to motivate each other, to let each other know we're not alone in this, and keep holding the governments accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you to everyone for taking part in this event. Thank you again.